would have kept me from the one I had today.
Good morning. Sure, no problem, no problem, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm doing well. I'm doing well. That's right. That's right. Well, I keep fighting. Of course, I get everything that God brings home from his day school, daycare. He's in a program over here at Tennessee Tech, and so he's always coming home with a sniffly nose. And before you know it, I've got a sniffly nose. So, but I've been blessed, and we had great fun in the snow last week, and just good times. So thank you. Sure, sure. Well, so and you hear a lot of reporting about that, particularly in recent days, as the Senator Schumer is threatening to try to end the filibuster and force this through. Thankfully, in this case, not just one but two the Democratic senators have refused to go along with that, and I hope they hold the line. Changing our I think what we're talking about is changing our voting procedures and using always these names seem like euphemisms, but the Protecting Our Democracy Act, using that to try to essentially steal our democracy and federalize the elections in a way that will allow them and essentially force every state to implement the broken policies that we've seen lead to elections that are questionable in other states around the country, and so I hope that those Democratic senators hold out and that can push back, and I'm confident our Republicans will on the Senate side. Unfortunately, this is already passed on the House side on a partisan basis, and it would be difficult to fight back from this. I wouldn't say impossible, because I think the courts would find a lot of what's in this to be unconstitutional ultimately. But I mean, you have to even be worried about that when you see some of the questioning on Friday from the liberal justices on the Supreme Court that seem to be so out of touch with the facts and reality. So these are perilous times, and we have to work hard to maintain our democracy. A lot has been happening positively on the election front across the country. And so I want everyone to know that we're working on this, and that we have legislation in Congress that's not going to go anywhere in this Congress because the Democrats won't let it. But there are efforts afoot all across the country on a state-by-state basis, which is where this really needs to happen, and it's been pretty dramatic. And I think ultimately, just shining the light of day on the techniques and processes that they put in place in the last election. And the press, continues. I saw a program, I'm sure many of your listeners probably saw, I forgot now what the title of it was last night, but just kind of channel surfing, came across a program on CNN that was attempting to paint all of this in very dramatic terms and blame President Trump and blame Republicans and try to create the image that the Democrats are the ones standing up for democracy and that it's the Republicans that are trying to tear down our democratic institutions and trying to usurp our voting process when frankly nothing could be further from the truth. And so we have the Save Our Democracy Act that I'm a co-sponsor of. Representative Jim Banks from Indiana introduced it. You'll recognize that name because he's one of the people that Minority Leader McCarthy appointed initially to the January 6th commission that Pelosi organized, and then she rejected Representative Banks and Representative Jordan because, of course, she was fearful that they would shine the light on what was happening with that, with that effort. And so, we've got to fight back. Obviously, the proposals that are the specifics of that proposal would, force all these things like ballot harvesting and same-day registration and, making it impossible to identify or authenticate the identity of voters, all the things that were done in these other states, usurping their state legislatures in many places, and allowing the 2020 vote to be, questionable and causing most of those states that had implemented these rules had trouble counting their votes ultimately, and we saw all the delays that happened. And, the American people are pretty wise to this. If a state like Tennessee can count its votes and be done before midnight on Election Day, then every other state should be able to do that too. And, and so, we've got to just keep in mind that there are lots of values that have to be vindicated when it comes to elections, and certainly the Democrats want to focus entirely on turnout. Let's let everybody who wants to vote vote. And they're not concerned about should those people get to vote, and can we trust the outcome of the election? They see those as secondary values. Well, I would say to you, at least those three values have to be balanced: turnout, timeliness of the result, and whether we can trust the result. Those three values have to be balanced at best. But if you're going to put one of those above all the others, it would be that the electorate trusts the outcome. I mean, that at the end of the day, if the people voting, if the people participating in democracy don't trust that the process is a fair process, then they're not going to accept the results. And I think the Democrats have lost sight of that. Of course, they want to maintain power. And I think this is a perilous year because I think they understand that the American people are going to push back. And, we're right now dealing with the Omicron variant. I heard a commentator on Fox last week say, just get ready for the midterm variant that will be coming soon. He said that tongue in cheek and joking, but I do fear that exactly that will happen. They'll be looking for a crisis later this year to justify, again, monkeying with our election process across the country. And if we're not vigilant about that and don't fight, and frankly, we probably didn't fight effectively in 2020. The president was calling this out, but I would say all of us were conservatives, and I would add the president to this. We probably didn't do enough soon enough to call foul, and we didn't work hard enough to fight back against this. And I think it just underscores, and I'll close with this, it just underscores the Founding Fathers' admonition that vigilance is the price of liberty, and we have to be vigilant. Absolutely. We simply have to, if anybody listening, I know it's easy to get discouraged, and I fully understand that and sympathize with that, with that reality that is out there. But I would just admonish and implore everyone that we cannot let them trick us into not showing up and voting. And we know, for example, that's what happened in Georgia, and we just can't let that happen again. I mean, it can't be really overstated how devastating losing the Senate, both of the Senate positions in Georgia, the Senate seats in Georgia was, because if we had just one of those, then we would, most of the agenda of Joe Biden would be stopped in the Senate, and we'd control the Senate. And I know that we'd be frustrated. We'd still be frustrated because when they control the presidency and one house of Congress, they can do a lot of mischief and at least advance a lot of things and the president in particular, and we've seen that in recent years, presidents that try to just rule as if they were dictators. And certainly this president is doing that with so much. I mean, I know this because I've seen it firsthand throughout my service in Congress. My whole first term in Congress, we were in the minority in the House, and that was painful. but we knew that the Senate would stop most things, and the things that the Senate didn't stop, the president would stop. Well, this time around, we don't have any of those. And so just remarkable what, in 1 year of one-party rule, it's been remarkable the damage that they've done and that they've tried to do. And but for the filibuster, and I'll have to admit to you, and I know many of your listeners will feel the same way, I was frustrated during the first 2 years of Trump's administration with the Senate because they were, not getting it done so often, and we saw how that happened, and that was frustrating. But we see, I think, illustrated now the value of the filibuster as an institution that's as an institutional rule that saves the country from a kind of whipsaw effect that happens when you see party control in that particular house of Congress shift back and forth. And so there's a price we all pay for it as a country, and the answer is pretty simple, and it's not always satisfying. I mean, it's frustrating because we hopefully will find ourselves back there, later this year, early, next January 3rd. I hope that we retake the Senate, and then we'll be fretting about the filibuster rule. And the answer, though, is that forces compromise. And for those of us who are strongly conservative, we don't like that. We'd rather not do that. But the answer to the Democrats right now, when they want to pass all these extreme measures, is, and they point at the Republicans and say, they're filibustering literally, and they're stopping us, and America can't move forward, and all that. Well, guess what? That's the way the institution was set up. And there was a purpose for that, and that was to force either you've got to have an overwhelming majority, or you've got to deal with the opposite views, and you've got to strike a compromise, and that's painful to do and frustrating when you don't get your way. I see that with my kids all the time, and anybody who's raised children knows that they've seen how they want to get their way, and they're mad when they don't. But eventually they learn that they have to bend to the will of their parents, and they have to meet the requirements. And so, that's what has to happen. And so we'll have to, the shoe will be back on our foot at some point, and we'll get a taste of that. And so the answer for the Democrats right now is they could get a lot of the things they want, and we'd be very frustrated about that because we'd be frustrated at the Republican senators that might compromise with them at some level, but they're not even trying. And I think it's important for the American people to understand that, is that particularly on the House side, there is no negotiation. There is no back and forth with the Democrats. It's their way or the highway, and they make that clear every day. And so, then this is kind of shifting us away from that issue, but, it's kind of remarkable, and your listeners should know that we're operating right now under the last Donald Trump budget. So in spite of all the things that they've achieved this past year, they haven't ever been able to pass a budget. And so we have extended President Trump's last budget through February now, and we're operating under that. And it's not an acceptable budget. I don't want to brag about it, but it is kind of humorous to see the Democrats wallowing in their majority and not being able to get things done because they want too much. They've tried to do too much. They've tried to get it all their way, and as a result, they've failed even at that basic function that Congress is supposed to fulfill. And so we just extended the last Donald Trump budget, which should have ended on September 30th last year. But instead, we've kicked the can down the road. And when this came up in December, Republicans proposed, well, why don't we just extend it for all of the next year? And knowing we couldn't, at the end of the day, we aren't going to win on that if they finally get their act together and advance a reasonable budget that they can pass over on the Senate side. And of course, they could use the reconciliation process that they talk about all the time to do this, but they can't even propose one that's reasonable enough, though extreme it would be, but they can't even propose one that's reasonable enough that would get all 50 of their senators on board. And so thank goodness for Joe Manchin at least standing up for something that, some reasonable principles that I think, as he says, and I think it's fair to say, he is he is to some degree reflecting the views of the voters in his state, and so I applaud him for that. I hope he holds the line. I hope he is resolute in that. Well, you're talking, of course. I assume you're talking about the American Recovery Plan that passed last spring. So Build Back Better, which is the thing that has really flummoxed ultimately the Congress and the administration. They've been unable to pass. I mean, it has if we want to talk about that, I mean, it has lots of awful stuff in it. It passed the House back in late November on a party line basis, and thankfully Republicans all held together and voted against it, and so we were able to all vote against that, but they all the Democrats ultimately knuckled under it, except for one, and I guess it's important to point that out because the Democrats would try to paint this picture that they're together, but they could not even get all of their members to go along on that. And so, but it did pass, and it's just chock full of things that are really just number one, terrible for the economy in terms of what it will do to inflation and discouraging work and making our supply chain problems even worse, and I mean just discouraging capitalism and entrepreneurship and all the things that have made this country great. So, I mean, you might clarify, do you want to talk about Build Back Better, or do you want to talk about the American Recovery Plan? It doesn't immediately. I've been saying American Recovery. I guess the American Rescue Plan. Actually, I've been saying recovery, but it's the American Rescue Plan is the actual precise title. And I'm not. That's not ringing a bell to me. And you said you sent me some stuff. I'm not sure I got that. I apologize. Sure. Well, and I was just reading as we there, and I'm not conversant enough with it, but I am seeing this issue, which I'm not completely conversant with, so I probably shouldn't talk about it. But and this is one of the this is of course I voted against the American Rescue Plan, and it it is disastrous. I think one of the things in it that has been probably most destructive to the economy is the increase in the child tax credit. And I say that with probably some listeners. I'm getting that. I mean, amazingly. I'm getting. And I guess I'll use this story because it illustrates kind of how we all become dependent on federal. How we all develop an expectation in the federal government. I can remember back. I guess it was in July when that started, and I've got two sons. Well, I get a check for $300, and the child tax credit is $300 per child. And of course, this all is going to catch up, when I file my tax return. But I get this check in the mail, and then the next month I get another check, and then it starts coming as a direct deposit. Well, I get that first check, and I'm a little confused, even though I sat in the room and voted against the act and looked at it and knew that was part of it. And I get this $300 check from the government. I'm like, what is this? And I'm thinking, am I getting some sort of tax refund? What's going on? Of course, I quickly was able to do some reading on the check and seeing it. This is that child tax credit. And of course, then my first thought is, well, wait a second. I got two kids. I'm supposed to get $600. and I say that to be, to somewhat in jest, but the problem is, but as we think back to last summer, thankfully Governor Lee had ended the plus up in unemployment payments that was discouraging a lot of people from going back to work. But at the same time, that same month, the federal government starts sending out these $300 per child tax credit payments. And, now we've had some chance to do the study on that, and the impact on discouraging people to go back into the workforce has been, into the millions. I've seen varying estimates, but I think the one that was probably most reliable was that probably that might encourage as many as 1 to 2 million people to stay out of the workforce. And so again, it's another example of the government printing money in this case. And you used to say borrowing it. For goodness sakes, they don't even borrow it anymore. They just print it. They just create it and then spend it. It is really just remarkable the destructive impact of that. And we've seen that. And so I reflect on this U-turn and maybe with a couple minutes here, I'll say on this for just a second, and then you can, if there's something else you want to talk about before we run out of time. But all year as Republicans, we were talking, and in the House, we were talking about this daily. We were talking about inflation. We were talking about the crisis at the border and the ill effects of that. We were talking about the supply chain and the damaging effects of Biden's policies. We were talking about how we just 2 years ago were energy independent as a country, how our economy was thriving. And we've seen with just 1 year of one-party rule and the disastrous policies of the Biden administration, we've seen all this, the defund the police movement. You kind of go down the list. I mean, there are literally, 8 or 10 or 12 of these policy areas that the Democrats have advanced, where as the year ended in 2021 and as we come into 2022, and we can look at each of these and see in very stark illustration how socialist, progressive, liberal policies have failed, and they fail time and time again, but the Democratic Party comes back to them. And so, we now have inflation. And you and I are both old enough to remember how devastating the inflation in the 1970s and the 1980s, the so-called, I would call it the Carter inflation, was just so devastating to the country. And it took us most of 2 decades to beat that back. And we know the price of beating that back, which is high interest rates. And for all of the listeners out there, it's a double whammy because inflation is just a tax on working Americans. It makes everything expensive. It's particularly tough on people who are on a fixed income and people at the lower end of the wage scale. And remember, for goodness sakes, when we were first doing these interviews, I was talking about how for the first time in 20 years we were seeing a real rise in wages for working Americans, and now for 8 out of the eight of the first 10 months of the Biden administration, real wages fell for working Americans, and and if you look at his first year in office, there's going to be a decline in real wages. That's coming on the heels of President Trump's policies that provided just the opposite. And we've seen, so many, the workforce participation rate falling for African American men and for African American teenagers and Asian Americans and Hispanic and Latino Americans, and they're dropping out of the workforce, and their real wages are declining, and they're being discouraged from working, and it's just a destruction of the American dream. And then we've seen, for goodness sakes, you probably saw this in late December, the San Francisco mayor talking about how we got to get tough on crime, and I hope they will, because they've gone down this road of this lax approach to crime that has caused, crime in this country to just get out of control, and particularly in our big cities. And so liberal policies don't work. They fail us. They impoverish the people. They make people dependent on the federal government, and that's not the direction we want to go in. Well, and so now that's a little bit different issue, and so there is this proposal, and fortunately it did not get included in Build Back Better, but it's still lurking out there. And I questioned the Treasury Secretary about this and was just horrified at her attitude, which is that that we should all that our banks should have to report all these transactions. And so having the government that deep into all of our business is just frightening to think about. And we know we can't trust them to keep that information private, and we can't trust them to have that information to chase us down. So it is really frightening what what they want to what they want to know about. There's no limit to the appetite that Democrats and liberals and progressives and the bureaucracy have for knowing about your business. Well, yeah, and I've been derelict in not. We went down a different direction, but I think we see COVID yet again on our doorstep and threatening our freedoms and liberties, and we see the overreach by the Biden administration. And I was speaking to a group last week about this, and just making the point that we took the Biden administration took its eye off the ball. And so Biden said he was going to cancel COVID. Well, we all know, and it's very clear now, not only did he not cancel COVID, but he squandered a year chasing all of these liberal pipe dreams that he has, and frankly did not put in place the testing and the other procedures. He went straight to mandates and trying to force American people to do things he wants them to do. And frankly, it's the choice of individuals about how they treat their body and what medicines they take and whether they want to get a vaccine or not. And we hopefully the Supreme Court's going to intervene. But we see here as we go into this next round, this next variant, that we don't have testing. And so the hypocrisy of this administration. First they tell us masks don't work, don't wear them. Then they tell us we all have to wear them. Now they tell us that you can't wear certain kinds of masks. I mean, and they can't get the story straight, and it ultimately degrades all of our confidences, all of our confidence in our experts because we see that they're playing games, and you can't trust them. And so it's just remarkable that this president, who told us, during the campaign year before last, that any president saw 220,000 Americans die on their watch should resign, should quit. Well, what happens when you lose 440,000 Americans on your watch? Apparently the same rule, again, not surprisingly, the same rules don't apply to Democrats that they want to apply to Republicans. I'm on a plane this morning. Yeah, so I'm gonna, as soon as we hang up, I'm gonna pack up and head toward Nashville. And we have a quorum call this afternoon for the second session of the 117th Congress. So I hope to be there with my N95 mask on, no doubt, and see what other tricks Nancy Pelosi has to throw at us for the new year. Thank you very much. Thanks for this time this morning, and thank you to those that are listening. Appreciate the opportunity to represent the people of the 6th District, and look forward to the next time we can visit together, U-Turn. Thank you.
Before season, I've been involved with racing season. The past 3 chapters relate to what we started off with. So I've been involved for 4 seasons. First year, we went to different churches. 2 different churches located in the church. Last year, we were fortunate we were able to work a picnic festival. And it wasn't available this year, so we hammered it basically efficiency to the so we're really what's convenient for the homeless to walk there and walk to the library and class. So we were going to like getting started because we were listening to a lot of politics. So we started in 15 minutes. Normally we do it in March. The last couple of years, March has been very high. So we have an option to put out tickets in February for the election or not. And the celebration. The first few years we were only open if you really keep up the road at the same time. Last 2 years here it started to continue to talk about doing taking bills, they're all here to come to the homes and the test season. So we're open regardless of the civil permit that we declare. We're coming together. This year we're going to have Mays and University, which is more in the different reasons that are coming sites. And they're trying to say radio sites. So they can do a press, a couple of sites. And then it's hard to have kids. I'm not sure what to take kids. For different reasons, but we've had a new team. And they're all working really hard to get out of the situation in this program. And like all the way the economy is right now, you want to learn clothes and just what we're talking about. I get left with the process of being a private almost impossible. Yes, I can't spoken for some of them, but these communities in the early times, several of them didn't know how to use because they didn't buy. So we've been able to take them to the opportunity to take them to our activities in the health department to so a lot of them get things in other classes like that for various reasons and working on it. I mean, I think so I'm not sure if I got really, what's the next move. So I couldn't get that really, but we got we can always use for volunteers. Our biggest challenge this year is working volunteer programs, and it's really hard. Unfortunately, we have a community like people around here who are volunteers. It's just great for your son to get volunteer and call. And the ones that we have a really community for she's on her own, so the company is really nice. That's how she can get what they want. And then the woman available to be on call and part of the salary. And what we can do, we can look. We haven't had it new, but we can have a food in the area that we haven't had in the past. We can have a little experience with that. We haven't really had anything this year. Over the last year, when we told the correspondent to read it on the same day, volunteer for kids. We took your message to read it there. And we closed into our mask. And at the same time, we closed and volunteers to do it. This year, we have to let them go. So, we try to take volunteers so that we can start out to more things, right? Once you call, you know, volunteers, they can go on and say what they thought they might be like to volunteer because they have some people there who are coming. And then we have people who are pretty meals, we have a short device now. And we have a couple of churches who they want to do what they do, like tonight. We have a board member who can people that post and for her holiday and she kind of stops on that their sticker box at home to go up and to get hold back and to organize recognition. Meals have been pretty good and most unfortunately we have some people who can't food. There was a food truck that was across the street together. They were only like how much they were. They got there and you know as we did the phones and sometimes they were about just long as well like what I could have said this is not all the days for food very well. People can work and say, oh, the castle work. You don't have to put still this. Sitting there and making tables, not the food. But one of our members is moving across the street. So we've got, we're relatively downtown. We've got something that's black. So meals have not been a big problem. We kind of seem to be very learned to change or people. What is something that the most important is and it's hard. Some years I think there's not much more open patients for relationships. And I think it's very important to have a fun that kind of great experience. But I can't do that. But I can do it. Now, it's not. We know that simple voice that we're talking about takes me to we are meditating and one of our activities by some person didn't know. We were getting the first day I was super negative and talking and was trying to make it better. We had that process of growth and fixing it up and bringing Jesus. The philosophic where they're talking because we're when people sometimes will relate to the reading and it's real from the we open it talking and we search preparation and I first thing like that the next morning you don't have to fix it breakfast and you want to make them out because it's not because we were fortunate enough to one of our movie work and it started over when the weather got bad. And we cleaned up the house because the library was closed. And one of them, the library was in the street on the south side. But the library was still closed because of the weather. That's pretty close. We had nowhere to go to the day, so if we were able to see the house, we had to declare the area called stuff out. We went to the store, so we bought that. We got a really good food for food, so it's we were very appreciative and I don't really helping think that food is still not big enough to go big point of the business. And we went to the donut, those are for kids. And I started to go to the garden and get my Christmas food, get laid up and everything. So they got something that's cool. But the song, I mean, they're not something on it. You know, we haven't done anything wrong. And then I'm for sure. Saturday night before Christmas. I'm also a pastor. More to come in, but I'm not scared. We're coming home back to the Lord. I can't. I want to tell her. An honor in reflects the honor. And the wind shower, I was way back right now. I think it's 5 hours. Very important. But the wind shower. And the floor is not. I mean, I need it, but I can see the wind. I mean, the morning comes out. But you can, we just don't do it. That's right. But for me, I'm shocked. I'm shocked. I'm yeah, she was unfortunate incident. I think it's she gets to like food. I just start at my young age and I feel so go back to my house. When I went from figuring out how to powerful and as soon as I construction these they were out of the control greater than so they made certain kind of kitchen kitchen and they see they're not even school and come back to the house. And I just told them, she got the children one day, and they remembered me the 2 hours before my birthday. I was disappointed because I got there. Yeah. Financial donations can be mailed to the PO Box, the Congersman, PO Box 973, Central Tennessee, PO Box 973, Tennessee, Kentucky 172. You can call me. I probably have phone calls to my personal cell phone. You can text the phone phone 992 1515 615 we plan on our volunteers in the background check. So you can go there also if you want to go to Facebook, you can sign up on the Facebook page of Congressman National University. Congressman National University, or you can call me at the email, the email to you, and then mail applications up to the majority of volunteers will help you in the next couple of years, taking the education with the trying to find a job, nobody wants to do this freaking phone. Yeah. 992 1515 615 992